Immigration negotiations sidetracked by a storm over comments by President Trump yesterday that he now claims weren't accurately reported. The president says the language used by me at the DACA meeting was tough, but this was not the language used. What was really tough was the outlandish proposal made a big setback for DACA. Never said anything derogatory about Haitians other than Haiti is obviously a very poor and troubled country. Never said take them out, made up by Dems. I have a wonderful relationship with Haitians, probably should record future meetings. Unfortunately, no trust. Mr. Trump didn't respond to questions today about the incident after a ceremony at the White House. Here's how some of the president's frequent critics reacted to the reports.
The President of the United States is racist.
We now know that we have in the White House someone who could lead the Ku Klux Klan in the United States of America, somebody who could be the leader of the neo-Nazi and publish just his words.
This is someone who's chosen a path that is absolutely racism with steroids.
Perhaps the White House feels the president's remarks will be well received in some parts of this country, among some parts of the president's base. And perhaps that is true. But it doesn't make what he said any less ignorant or any less racist.
Our president is a clear and present danger to non-white people in America. It's that simple.
On the election, no.
All right, so obviously some widespread criticism, and of course people on the left, Jesse, that have disfavor with the president, find that he is racist, then bring his base in to say that the base is also racist and that he shouldn't be in the White House, not fit to govern.
Yeah, I mean, the left has seized on this, but Trump gave him the weapon. He shouldn't have said it. It wasn't a classy thing to say. It was crude. It was rude. I wouldn't say it, but Trump's offensive. And we've known Trump says offensive things for a very long time. So it shouldn't come as any surprise.
He's also issued a denial of it.
And it's no one knows exactly what was said except him and the people in the room. But putting that aside, the point he was making is that these countries that he was talking about, I don't believe are S-hole countries. They're impoverished, they're riddled with corruption, and they have a lot of problems. With that said, he was saying he believes in merit-based immigration. That was, I think, what he was trying to get at, because people in the room were saying, let's do a deal where we bring in these people from third-world countries, and the president has made it very clear. He wants to bring in people that are based on merit, whether it's a high education, whether it's English speaking. Those are the things that he wants to focus on. And in immigration policy, he's trying to put forth that's the priority for him. What got lost in his gaffe, I would say, was that people now aren't talking about that. And the deal is really hanging in the balance. And he had a lot of momentum going into this. The tax thing was doing great. He had its great meeting, and he was going to bring together a lot of people on an immigration overhaul. And now all that's been lost. So he needs to do a lot to regain the momentum. I dislike the people on the left who, and I know people, and you know people, that have, been at cocktail parties. They call the Bronx an S-hole. They call Middle America an S-hole. These people that are in their studios and they're putting people down that live in different parts of the country. They call the South Hicks. They call Christians bad things. People that say bad things. What did Obama say about bitter clingers? Hillary called half the country deplorable people. So the reaction in the media when they say Trump says this about another country, there have been Democrats that said horrible things about people in our own country and have not gotten criticized nearly as much as the president. So there's a little hypocrisy there. But again, with that said, obviously the president said the wrong thing here and has to do a lot better moving forward when it comes to blunt talk.
Okay. All right. So, Dana, how do you see this in terms of, the communications being handled by the White House in response to this?
Well, if they wanted to deny it, last night would have been the night to deny it. Apparently, there were reports that there were calls being made just to check in with people that they'd like to talk to, and everybody was giving him the thumbs up. And then this morning, that changed, and he said, that's actually not what I said. So we're actually doing two things now. We're having people who are defending the comments, but even if he didn't say the comments are okay, meaning that's some of the defenders are saying that. So agreeing with what Jesse said in that it's not exactly surprising that you would have profanity in the White House. This has happened in every White House. Remember in 2000 when I think it was President Bush, at the time a candidate, said that one of the New York Times reporters was a major league a-hole.
Really, Dana?
And Cheney said,
please.
big time. Okay, then you have Joe Biden in the White House saying, oh, when he's about to sign Obamacare, you know, Mr. President, this is a big effing deal. Like, profanity is not the issue. The sentiment is. But I would say that aside from all of that, and I don't need to go into how I feel about it, the question is, what do you want to accomplish and what do you need to do and who do you need to help you do it? And Senator Dick Durbin is one of those people. And what happened is this makes it so much harder for Dick Durbin to convince his Democrats to go along with him to try to get these deals done. And this is not just about the DACA deal. It's about the spending and the CHIP money, the Children's Health Insurance Program, because now there are Democrats on that side that are going to dig in and they're going to say, I'm not going to want to be a part of this. You have to push back harder on President Trump. But the sad thing is, on Tuesday, they had a really good meeting. And by Friday now, I think they're farther apart than they were earlier in the week. And they've got 7 days until the next government shutdown.
Okay, so, Greg, it wasn't fortuitous timing, to say the least. So, as Dana points out, it's put Durbin and others in a bit of a position. The president is denying that he said this, but the timing of it perhaps should have come quickly on the heels yesterday. Where does it go from here, and what do you make of it?
Well, Durbin is a bozo. Let's be frank on this one. I mean, this is a guy who said chain migration is a racist term because of the word chain. So let's not forget that. Yeah. The big issue, the thing that really bugs me, it's not fair that all the other networks get to say the word and we can't.
That's your takeaway.
It's like when you know when you were a kid and one of your friend's parents lets him go see R-rated movies, but your parents won't. That's Fox News. They won't let us say the word. Actually, they haven't told us.
Fox News is the parent.
If Fox News is, they're saying, you know what I mean? They're saying, it's like, yeah, you shouldn't be saying that. I asked if we could say the word, and they said we couldn't.
They shut you down.
They shut me down.
Good to have that big talk here.
But there is also a sense here. Like I don't appreciate the language either. And in fact, actually, when you hear it, you go, I hope he means the countries and not the people.
Well, don't you think that's what it means?
No, I'm hoping, and I think I'm hoping.
But the countries specifically.
Yes, I'm hoping. But that has to be asked. If he means the people, he needs to clarify. Did he mean the countries or the? I'm hoping he meant the country, and he can prove that by just saying merit-based immigration can take people from those S-hole countries. I can think that those you have to separate these two issues. I can believe that these countries are really bad, but people that come there can be really good. Yep. That's all he has to do, I think. Now, like I say, I find the word terrible and all that stuff, but I'm not going to be self-righteous about it because when I watch the media do it, I just can't handle how self-righteous and sanctimonious they are. I mean, these are people that if they went to a gym and there wasn't the right smoothie bar in there, they would call that an S-hole, especially if they were living in New York City. If Equinox, if the gym didn't have a personalized TV in front of their stair climber, that's an S-hole. I mean, everybody uses that word. Now, you're right about the sentiment. That's why I think that you have to divide it. But the point is, and then I'll shut up, it's always going to be about rhetoric versus action. And right now, nothing Donald Trump has done in terms of action has been the problem. In fact, the country's doing really well. We've got high optimism in small business. We've got a crazy stock market. People are getting bonuses. You're seeing Iran, maybe there might be a secular revolution. You're seeing North Korea, things happening. But the issue among the media is always going to be this coarse rhetoric, which we all, I think, admit has always been the problem. So Donald Trump makes Donald Trump a heavy lift for everybody. Because it's like a 4-hour drive to Disneyland right when it's closing. You only get an hour of rides. And that's what Trump is. He's a 4-hour ride to Disneyland when it's about to close. As long as the economy does well and his actions are good, people will accept this heavy lift. But if the economy goes down and there's an ugly war or something bad happens, then it's going to be an issue. But I think people already know what they got.
I know, but
they know what they got.
Are we going to get people getting caught up on the semantics, the semantic gymnastics, saying I disapprove of the language, it's colorful, et cetera. As Dana said, this is nothing new that we've seen in White House, administration, Congress, whatever, every place, workplace. However, Greg brings up one good point finally, thank God, which was you look at the list, of accomplishments. So we're super focused here on the language, but what about the accomplishments? Shouldn't the Democrats be fair and focus on that as well?
I think anybody can be fair, but this is not about being fair. The man told a lie this morning that compounded his racial comments yesterday. His own White House didn't deny it. And now he comes out at the last moment after, I guess he's watching Fox and Friends, and sees that even people who are stalwart supporters are saying, hey, this was really unforgivable. We shouldn't have done this. It's wrong. And then he says, oh, well, I didn't quite say it that way, and that language wasn't quite the same. I'm amazed at how many Republicans are put into the difficult position of having to defend President Trump over and over again. I mean, and distracting from the agenda, but maybe it's an intentional distraction, maybe it's I don't know. But in this case, he has offended people so deeply, and yet Republicans are like, well, Paul Ryan today, well, it was wrong, that shouldn't have done, but he won't say, you know what? This is across the line. You can't say this about fellow people in this world, but certainly Americans. How many Haitian Americans, African Americans, El Salvadoran Americans are making a great contribution to this country? People who are hardworking. To Greg's point, this is not about the countries, Greg. It is about the people.
No, he has to clarify that. He hasn't clarified that.
Allow me to speak. The reason that I say it's about the people is because it was in the course of a discussion about the lottery. And, he wants the lottery done away with. He says, why do we need a lottery to get in here? He wants to cut legal immigration in half, but the lottery system he objects to on the basis that it should be about merit. It shouldn't be about a lottery.
Right.
The lottery was created, however, because there is a shortage of people coming from certain countries in the normal flow. So the idea was we're going to try to engineer it so as to repair that and create opportunities for people from all over the world as American immigrants.
Which can be done on merit.
He then comes back and says, oh, no, we don't want people from those countries. That's about people, Greg. And to say that, imagine what you would say to the Irish coming from famine, the Jews coming from Germany, the Italians.
But they want to come here because their countries aren't doing well.
About people of color.
If he says,
and comparing them to Norwegians.
If he says that meritocracy-based immigration allows people from those countries in, it's fine. But if he says it doesn't, then you're right. But we don't know that yet.
Well, it would be contrary to what we say on the Statue of Liberty. It doesn't say we'll take your brightest and richest. It says we'll take people.
So you're against the whole meritocracy thing?
No. Let's have a discussion.
We're trying.
What I'm saying is what he said yesterday was so deeply offensive and wrong. And I can't believe that Republicans and even Trump people should be up in arms. He somehow suggested, his people would agree to this? They're not all racist.
I think they understand that he is your rude, rich uncle.
Well, he's using, colorful language, but nevertheless, when you look at the merits of what he's talking about, it should be a merit-based system. There's serious, significant problems with chain migration. So language aside, those issues have to be dealt with in a responsible way.